Where does Leon Edwards go with a win over Nate? Where does Nate go with a win over Leon? This is a very hard thing to predict. I read this article. I'm reading an article, but I just read this question, right? That was the clickbait. You click on it, you go into it. And largely what those conversations are trying to be had is who can be a bigger star, who can get a better draw. It doesn't have anything to do with the rankings. It doesn't have anything to do with how impressive where's their stock. And I only submit for you that you never know these things because nobody's a star until there's a star. George Masvidal is currently the second biggest draw in all of MMA, only behind Conor McGregor, and George was just one of the guys 3 years ago, right? I mean, it just doesn't happen. There was a time when Chuck Liddell, it just wasn't working. Tito was the big draw. Chuck was supposedly better in practice. Tito had the charisma, and then when Chuck caught on, and people were dressing up for him as Halloween, Chuck became the most recognizable fighter in the world. I remember when Evander Holyfield was doing everything right, but he was in the shadows of Mike Tyson, and the promoters had just ran with Iron Mike. Evander had to get that shot and had to get his ear bit off just to get the kind of acclaim. I'm only reminding you of this because we don't know. How's Leon going to beat him? That might have something to do with it. Does he go out and lay on top of him? Does he go out and control him for more rounds than he gets controlled? Or does he go out there and KO Nate? I don't believe anybody's put Nate down, ever. That's off the top of my head, but I don't believe Nate's ever been knocked out. Certainly if Nate was ever to tap to somebody, I mean, this would be a little bit more shocking and impressive news that could catapult somebody further. There could be a certain interview done at the end of the night. Look, Masvidal was getting ready to fight Covington. Usman gets a win over Burns, goes on ESPN with a stick in his hand, calls for Masvidal. I mean, Masvidal's sitting there, great, that's my name. Perfect. I guess I'm fighting for the title, right? I mean, it's one of those things. Very hard to predict ahead of time. And there's not a full recipe. I've talked to you guys before about UFC fighter summits. But I remember the one in 2008 or it was 2009, and Dana stood up in front of the group. And, this is very meaningful coming from Dana because he is the promoter. It is his job to make you interesting. Nobody's going to make you a star except for your promoter. It's one of the most important things when a fighter signs with a promoter of what can you do for me. So many fighters are now looking at it. Who offered me more? This guy or this guy? Great, that's who I go with. They shouldn't look at it that way. They should very much look at it for who is the better promoter, who's got the outlets, who's got the platforms, who believes in me, who has a plan for me. There's all sorts of questions that should be considered right up there with signing bonus, purse, win, show. I mean, there's a promoter, right? So when the promoter stands up in front of the group, and this is Dana, and he said, you know what? I don't know what it takes to make a star. I've sure made plenty of them, though, and they all have one thing in common, which is they win their fights. You want to know what to do on your end of this? Go win your fights. Because what does that mean? That means you get another fight. Which means not only did I tell your story, I will now get to tell it again. And I can keep telling it to as many people will listen, for as many people as think that this is interesting, as long as you stay under contract. And the only way I can promise you either of those things happen is that you win your fights. It was very simple. It was very to the point. But I remember it. It was straight from the guy whose job it is to make us interesting, to say the best thing you can do is to come back. Come back again, tell the story again. And I only bring that because Leon sure checks a lot of boxes, whether people want to admit it or not. Leon's fun to watch. He's good looking. He's got something to say. He's got a bit of a story. Got the push and pull in the back with Masvidal. He's starting to main event cards. He's getting more and more attention. Now he's going to be in there with Diaz and like a special rules match. I mean, this is what this is in the world of pro wrestling. This is how Vince would have built it. We got a special rules match. Oh, really, Vince? When? What rule is different? But they got a special rule for this match, which is it's not a main event. It's not a title fight. They're going to go 5 rounds. Why? I'd be blowing that up if I was either one of these guys. If I was Leon or I was Nate, I'd have an entire story and I'd make sure everybody knew that this was changed specifically for me. The history books will say I was the first to do this. And I would just go out and do a little bit better job of telling that story. But as far as predicting where does Leon go, I mean, look, I got to ask you guys a question, which is Usman Covington booked? Because I thought it was. I thought it was for a long time. I know that Colby's training for it. I know Usman's not trying to get out of it, but at some point, Usman's going to face the very tough question that the true greats, St. Pierre, have to face, which is I'm going to have to not only beat everybody, I'm going to have to beat him a second time. What order do I want to go in? It's totally different if Usman, who was the champion, was trying to pick and choose and navigate the streams. He'd had every right to do it, but we would have every right to identify it and call him out. It's very different when he's going to have to go through the deck a second time. It's very different in choosing in which order do I do that. He has a very good understanding at this point. Who can cause him the most problems as he sees it? He's got every right to go and get the biggest paycheck for the easiest fight. That is the name of the game. But it's very different in calling Usman out when he's going through the deck a second time. And I only bring that to you because if Usman is not tied up with Colby, if I've got that, I've had this one wrong 4 times. I don't know why I keep on thinking that's a done deal. Maybe because it makes the most sense. Maybe because it should have been redone. Maybe because it was the hardest and most competitive and dirtiest match I've ever seen at 170 pounds. And it would have been remade, but there was a rumor started that Colby had a broken jaw. At any rate, I digress. The point is this. I don't know if that fight's made. And there may be an opportunity to still come in and steal that. And Usman's got a couple of directions he can go when you're going through the deck a second time. He gets a little bit more leeway. He just does. And Colby is very stubborn that it's Usman or it's Masvidal or it's both of them at the set. But it's going to be Usman and or Masvidal, right? It's one of these things. Where I do think that Leon, with the right performance, and I would even argue that for Nate if Nate wanted the opportunity. That's another question you have to ask. Does Nate want to fight for the world championship? If Nate goes out and beats Leon, does Nate want to fight Usman? I'm not certain that we know that answer. I'm not certain if Nate beats Leon that Nate isn't going to go after Masvidal and say to hell with that belt. You got another one and we got 2 rounds that are left, right? That's why Nate's interesting because we don't know. Nate is very interesting because he will keep you guessing, right? When you think you've got the answers, he changes the questions. I suggest for you to be a little bit more open-minded though to Leon. Leon's stock could really bounce. It's probably going to come down to some intangibles. It's probably going to come down, how does he win if he wins? How impressive does he look even in victory? Leon's probably going to get a little bit harder judgment than some other people. But I think that the verdict needs to be open. And I think we need to be open to the idea of the performance. What is said and done before and after, and what direction does he point the cannon?